All right, guys. So we left off with acid and bases and pH on the first video. So again, here's that scale to kind of take a look. So when we start to talk about household bleach, you can start to see it's up here in that basic side. So this is just like the scale in my classroom. Well, close to it. Let's just put it that way. Where on my base side, I've got it as blue, and on my acid side, it's in the red. And remember that scale's up above my fume hood, or the opening to the fume hood. So as we look, you can start to see seawater is sitting at an 8. But when we talk about ocean acidification in the future, understanding that if it's an 8, but then goes to a 7, 6, and we start to move down this way, okay? So if seawater is supposed to be an 8 and it's a base, and you acidify, and it goes down to a 6, remember, for those animals, things just got 100 times worse. So start to think of it that way, all right? And that's when we start to say, oh, it only went from little pH, it's no big deal. For the fish and how they breathe, because remember, they breathe out of a water base. So when it hits their gills, that is a big deal for them. Okay, so keep that in mind. So chemical reactions. So whenever, remember, those are the things that if it's a chemical reaction, it's not reversible. It's now changed into something new. Wasn't lost. So remember, mass cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. So that means it went from being connected to this molecule to connected to this one. All right. So whenever we go through and we look at it, once we changed, it's changed. If it was a physical reaction, then it'd just be, shredding it, making it smaller, crushing it, stuff like that. But it's not. And a lot of the reactions that we talk about with toxic chemicals or things in our environment, stuff like that, it's going to be a chemical reaction, which means it's going to have a stronger event rather than just, oh, it melted. Okay? So, as we talked about, organic molecules are going to be anything that's going to have carbon attached to it. We are organic. Versus stuff in the environment, the stuff that's the abiotic pieces, are going to be your inorganics. And so they're going to be the stuff that's, so if you pick up a rock and it's got this orange vein through the middle of it, could be iron that's resting and oxidizing with the air. So you could have some of those structures, some of those compounds that are built into it. Now, these are the biological molecules that we talked about before. These are all organic. That you are organic. So you have the carbs, the stuff you eat. And so those of you who like your cookies, your muffins, your pasta, your rice, those are carbs. Remember that. If we go to protein is going to be anything that's going to be lean muscle. That's going to be, protein's going to be around your cells. Protein's going to be used in a lot of things. Those are your enzymes. So, and remember, your enzymes are things that can be impacted by temperature. Ooh, things getting hotter. pH. Oh, that ocean acidification. Salinities. Talked about that. So protein is impacted. Those enzymes are impacted by those things. So in other words, when we talk about it got a little hotter, if you go from 98, 99 degrees to 101, you're running a fever. That's only 2 degrees. And you feel like garbage. So think about that globally with other organisms and temperature changes. Sometimes it doesn't take much for it to push our proteins out of their comfort zones and they actually start to denature. So not a good thing. And if those proteins aren't doing what they need to, then we may not be able to figure out how to break down a carbohydrate or be able to build new DNA in our cells as our cells continue to grow. That means organism growth is stunted or impacted. And so it's one of those trickle-down effect of one thing can lead to affecting another. So that's where those things tie together. Remember your lipids. Those lipids are your fats, fat, oil, and wax. So if stuff starts to change, the waxy cuticle on a leaf may be impacted. The leaf isn't protect it anymore and it dries out, the leaves dry out, the tree dies off, oh, we have habitat loss. And so that's where we start to look at some of how those biological molecules kind of tie in there. Remember cells. All living things are made of cells. So some things are single cells, aka your bacteria. Those are also known as prokaryotes. So remember, sometimes in science we have a couple different names for things. So you have bacteria and then you have prokaryotes. Sometimes you may even hear bacteria called a pathogen as we go through in future chapters. So when we talk about, it's not the only pathogen, but it is one type of pathogen. So keeping that in mind, and then also don't go under the misunderstanding that bacteria is not all bad. You have some that is symbiotic to you, that your gut needs it, your urinary tract. You have bacteria in your mouth, both good and bad. So some of it has got a strong benefit for us. Some of it, not so much. We could probably do without. That's why it makes it pathogenic. All right. So then we talk about that energy flow. So let's get into that and take a look at those. So energy is the ability to do work or transfer heat. Okay. Power is the rate at which you do it. So that's why if you ever thought, wow, they're really energetic. And then quickly someone will say, wow, they're really powerful. Or that person is a powerful person. Why? They do their work and they get it done quickly. And so whether that means they go into a sales meeting and like, boom, they win the deal. Or whenever they're running track, they're running, but if someone's powerful, means their run is quicker than the other person beside them. So energy versus power that's going to be some of your differences. So when we talk about a joule, all right, so that's the amount of energy used. So it's watts per second. So when we talk about the amount of joules used to run a power plant or something along that line, we're talking about how much energy and power that's coming through there. All right. So here's another one of those little charts. This is where I'm going to tell you, look in your textbook. When we talk about our forms of energy, our electromagnetic radiation, aka this is light. Now, our electromagnetic spectrum goes in a wide range. This goes back to physics. And my advice to you is you need to look up and what your ranges are from small wavelength. That means they're the little bitty waves, to longer wavelengths. Those are your ones that have got the longer rolling waves. So when we start to talk about your smaller ones, those are going to be when we start to talk about gamma radiation. Not the Incredible Hulk, but gamma radiation. That's what comes off of the sun. That is what where our energy for life is set up. So that gamma radiation, once we have that, as it moves from sun's release, within the next 8 minutes from its release, it's converted from gamma radiation through our atmosphere to UV and visible light. Thank goodness. Gamma radiation is too intense. Because remember, between gamma radiation and UV light, we also have X-ray. Are you able to play in an X-ray machine? Probably shouldn't. Hence why if you've had an X-ray, they'll ask you when was your last. Because they don't want you exposed to that much radiation. It's not good for the body. Definitely not good if you're pregnant. Hence why when you go to the dentist office, they'll give you that nice little lead apron to put on, or the little lead collar to put on to minimize your exposure. If they don't, I highly suggest that you ask them, hey, can I have the apron, please, in order to protect my cells, especially if you're young and you haven't had kids yet. You want to make sure that you advocate for yourself on that one. Little side note. Okay? So that's gamma radiation, moves into X-ray, then goes into UV. And the way to remember that, that's the next one, because then after that we go to visible light. UV's here. Here's my visible light. Guess which part of that color spectrum is closer to UV? UV stands for ultraviolet. Okay, there's your Roy G. Biv. The V, the violet. Okay, so there's your violet, your indigo, your blue, okay, green, yellow, orange, and red. Guess what on the next part of the electromagnetic spectrum is? There's my R, is my infrared. red. Then I start to go into microwaves, radio waves, and all those down on that end, which are your big loopy ones. The longest one, if we're going to go with radio waves, is going to be your AM. AM will travel much, 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 much slower versus you go with your FM. Your FM is quicker waves, but that's one reason why when you drive outside of a city, all of a sudden, where'd my station go? Versus the AM stations will last and last and last. Okay? So there's your electromagnetic spectrum. So like I said, our sun is our input energy. All right? Without the sun, the other conversions of energy that we do, the energy transfer wouldn't be able to occur. It's a trickle-down effect. Okay? As far as our life-based energy, let's go with that. So that would tie into the potential energy. So as those light waves are coming, they have a potential to be turned into solar panel energy. They have potential to be turned into the energy needed for a plant to go through photosynthesis. And a algae to photosynthesize that's floating in a lake or an ocean, which then can be converted into another types of energy. So that solar energy can be, that we put in that photovoltaic cell, can go in and turn into electrical energy. And then we take the ones that went into the tree and the algae, those get turned, as we know, photosynthesis. You put the light in, you get the sugars out and oxygen. So that gets turned into chemical energy. And then that chemical energy is then eaten by an herbivore. And that herbivore will go through and break down that energy and use it for other chemical energy and heat. And so the tree also will release heat too. So I forgot to mention that one. But it'll release heat also. So not all of it is going 100% solo into that. It will have some heat loss and some other loss to some other activities like reproduction, survivability, growth. But when it comes in from the sun, after that, conversions start happening. Heat is the number one way that it is lost. Put that in your head. All right. Kinetic energy, if you remember that from physics, that's how you move. So the ability for your little cheetah that, is going to chase after the bunny rabbit that just ate the plant. If that's the case, that running is going to start to turn into kinetic energy, that movement energy, aka you have muscles that are moving and sliding, creating friction, heat, and so forth. So that's going to keep that organism moving around. All right. We can measure kinetic energy by temperature. Like I said, you start moving, if you start working out, you start to feel hot. Reason why? You're burning calories. So as we go through and we start to talk about that, we'll talk about calories in here in a chart in a second for units and discuss what that means when we talk about our own diet or other organisms and stuff like that. So we start to talk about our laws of thermodynamics. Okay, we have a couple that we have. So the first law is going to be that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, it'll only transfer. So that's where we talked about that potential to some practical actual uses for it, whether that be kinetic, whether that be electric, whether that be what have you, depending on what system we're talking about. All right. So in the one that they have here, we have the car. The input is you put gasoline in. Well, that gasoline is going to go through a combustion piece. That combustion depends on how it moves those pistons. It's going to determine whether your axle moves and whether your wheels turn and you go forward. If it's got enough, and so hence why you have to sometimes push your accelerator more and more and more. Depends on what you're in. Especially those of you who like to go mudding. There's going to be a time where you can push that accelerator all you want to, give enough gas and enough power or push, and your tire still doesn't get out of the mud. It just spins. Because there's other things in place. If there's not enough friction for the tires, it can't overcome the energy need, and it will just spin in that mud. All right? So, but like as the diagram shows, a lot of our energy turns into waste. If you remember back from physics, one of the things that kills a function of something is its efficiency. And the thing that kills efficiency is it being converted to heat instead of usable material. So this is where we're going to pause and we're going to start the video number 3.